schools just do a terrible job teaching us how to actually manage our money. In fact, most schools don't. Only 23 states actually require a personal finance course to graduate high school. Less than half. So, so many of us need that like financial reset button. We need to say, what do we do with our money? How do we get informed? And many of us spend our whole lives not feeling good about money, which is why I think it's so important to start with basics in your 20s and 30s, or start with basics at any age if you never got them. My book, How to Money, we heard from people in their 50s and 60s who said that that book really opened their eyes to the financial basics that they just never got. Um, there was a 2023 Capital One survey that nearly 70% of millennials say that they're feeling anxious about money, and those numbers last year were actually even worse. So, it's clear we have a long road ahead of us to build up our financial confidence. So that's what we're going to explore a little bit today. Um, on the next slide, you guys are not behind. So if any of you are here today because you didn't learn about money in school, because I sure didn't, that's okay, right? Like more than 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That actually includes people earning six figures. So if you're still figuring it out, you're not late. You're actually right on time. Um, a recent CNBC report showed that 57% of adults can't actually cover $1,000 emergency. Which is not, ideally we would all have so much more than that in our emergency fund, which is much easier said than done. We're going to get into that a little bit today about how we can actually make that happen. Um, but, the important thing is that, every decision that you guys make financially is a vote for your future, right? Like every single dollar that you spend or save from this day forward, that is what is going to set you up towards building your money confidence and building your financial life. The next slide, we want to talk about the emotional side of money a little bit today as we're talking, right? Because money is not math, it is emotion. So many of us make impulse purchases. Um, and a recent study showed that Americans spend nearly $2,000 per person on non-essential items every year, right? So that's like, I feel like the checkout line at Sephora, the checkout line at Old Navy, even like a magazine at the grocery store, all of those impulse purchases really add up. I know I'm guilty of this. I think we all are. But if we look at that amount that we're spending, this doesn't mean we can never give ourselves a little treat, but it does mean we need to be a little bit more intentional about where those dollars are going. The next slide, budgeting. The average person overspends by $7,400 a year. And again, that's those impulse purchases we talked about and lifestyle creep. So here again, you're not alone. If you're overspending, we totally get it. According to a debt.com report, 86% of Americans who budget have actually found that it helps them get out of debt faster and feel more in control of their money, right? So I think so many of us think that budgeting is about sacrifice. It's about telling ourselves what we can't have. It's about reining in our fun and saying no to fun events. When really budgeting is, I like to think of it as kind of like Google Maps for your money, right? You can get lost without it, but even with it, like wrong turns are not going to throw you completely off track, right? So budgeting is not something that makes us say no to fun. Budgeting is something that helps us say yes to the things that actually matter, to the things that we actually care about, like travel or saving for your future or a kid's college education or just being able to build up that emergency fund that we talked about earlier. So when we talk about budgeting, the next slide is the 50, 30, 20 rule, right? So I don't know if you guys have heard of this for budgeting, but it's kind of our favorite budgeting method at Her Money. It was first made popular by Senator Elizabeth Warren, but it's a good framework for your budget, right? You say you're going to spend 50% of your budget on your needs, 30% for your wants, and 20% for savings and or debt repayment. So if let's break it down. If you make $3,500 a month after taxes, that's roughly $1,750 for rent, groceries, and bills, $1,050 for fun, travel, and extras, and then $700 to go towards savings, goals, or debt payoff. Now, That may sound completely unrealistic to you guys. The rent particularly sounds unrealistic for me as somebody who lives in New York City. But this isn't about being completely exact at completely 50%, exactly 30%, or exactly 20%. It's about a framework, right? So if you're thinking of the 50, 30, 20 framework, it will help you rein in some of that spending or maybe be a little bit more intentional about finding a cheaper place to live, right? It's just a guide. And the point is not rigid perfection. It's basically to make sure that you're having what you need covered, having some joy in your life, but also still preparing for the future. Because I think what happens, or what happened to me certainly in my 20s, with my rent was really high. So my savings goals literally just covered my rent in the moment. Like my savings goals were going to cover my food every month. My savings, any money that I would have put towards savings was going to cover internet, phone every single month. And we all have to do that for a time. Like we all lose jobs. We all are not earning as much as we want, and we have to make sacrifices. But long term, if those savings goals continually get sacrificed, then that's a problem, which is why this budgeting rule is such a good framework because it at least gets us thinking about it. The next slide is about tracking before you budget, right? So I think a lot of us may think of budgeting as building a spreadsheet, but it's really not, right? It's about tracking your spending. You can do an app, you can do a spreadsheet, you could just do an old-fashioned pen and paper. Because when you track your spending, I think I worried about tracking my spending initially because I thought I'm going to feel guilty. I'm going to see how much I'm spending on food. I'm going to see how much I'm spending on clothes, and it's just going to make me feel bad about myself. But it's actually, I found it really empowering. We have a budgeting course at Her Money called Finance Fix. And we actually hear this from literally every single participant that once they actually started tracking, they suddenly felt like they were in the driver's seat of their money. And that's the beautiful thing that budgeting can bring to your life. So the next slide is again getting a little bit more realistic about what budgeting looks like for 2025 because I know that costs are absolutely off the charts right now. Rent is up more than 20% right now compared to what it was pre-pandemic. Grocery prices are still 14% higher than they were 2 years ago. There was a recent report also that found that the average American spends over $200 a month just on subscriptions, which is up 65% from 2 years ago. So it's the Netflix, it's the internet, it's the groceries, it's the rent, it's all of it, right? So budgeting today is really about visibility and flexibility. If you don't know where your money is going, it's going to be impossible for you to adapt when costs rise, right? So if you have no idea how much you're spending every month on food, are you even going to notice when your grocery costs go up by 14%? And if you don't notice when your grocery costs go up by 14%, are you going to sacrifice the money that you would have been able to put into savings, right? So this is why budgeting is so important, not just so that we can kind of rein ourselves in, but so that we can know if we're suddenly paying more for the same like bag of oranges or bag of potatoes that we were buying last week. And then we can adjust, we can shop at a cheaper store, we can look for alternatives, we can, you know, ask for a raise if we need to. And we'll get to all the other things to do in a minute. But, that's why building a budget now isn't just helpful, right? It's almost like it's your first best defense against inflation, economic certainty, and just waking up one day and feeling like, where did all my money go? The next slide is debt, right? Because when we talk about budgeting and when we talk about being financially secure, the number one thing that derails people is debt. And you guys either know people that this has happened to or you know this firsthand because we all do, because credit cards are really outrageous, particularly now. So I'll give an example. Let's say you put $1,000 emergency on a credit card at 24% interest, and that 24% interest is the national average as of this month. If you only make the minimum payments on that $1,000, you will end up spending $2,200 over the course of about 5 years. So you've literally more than doubled what you're paying, and it's taken you 5 years to do it. Um, you guys may have heard the number now. Americans now have over $1.21 trillion in credit card debt, which is the highest ever on record. But if we take that same debt and we pay an extra $50 a month above the minimum, we're going to save hundreds of dollars in interest and we're going to shave years off of what it takes to pay that debt down, right? So this isn't just about numbers. This isn't about getting on some treadmill to say, you know, paying my bill and I'm just not going to look at it. I'm just going to throw the minimum towards it, right? If we can get intentional about our money and we can see where our money is going, we can pay off debt and keep more of our hard-earned money, right? Because nobody wants to pay the credit card company, right? Nobody wants to know that their $1,000 charge is going to cost them $2,200 and that extra $1,200 that we've just spent is literally going into the pockets of Visa or American Express, right? That's a terrible, terrible feeling. Um, but so many of us are in that trap, and the best thing we can do is to get on a serious plan to pay down that debt. Next slide is about credit scores because when we talk about debt, we have to talk about credit scores. The average US credit score is 717, which is actually pretty good. A score above 740 is considered very good, which can give you access to lower interest rates, better loan terms. Um, and, when we talk about paying our credit card bills every month and we talk about paying more than the minimum, we also need to be paying on time because your payment history actually makes up 35% of your credit score. So that means how good you've been about paying on time every month. Then credit utilization, which is how much of your available credit you're using, is another 30% of your score. That means if you have a credit limit of $2,000, right? Are you maxing that out? Are you spending all $2,000 every month? Are you only charging like $500, right? So, those are the two biggest levers that you can pull, right? Is it paying on time every single month and then not maxing out your credit card? And doing those things will really raise your score dramatically over time. And because you're building that trust with the lenders. All right. The next slide is debt in 2025, right? So again, things in 2025, I think we're all feeling the pinch right now because things are just so, so expensive. In 2024, Americans actually added over 150 billion in new credit card debt, right? So that's going into that tr $1.21 trillion we talked about. Um, but this is not because people are irresponsible, right? And if you have credit card debt right now, I'm betting it's not because you're irresponsible. It's because wages have just simply not caught up with costs. Everything is more expensive, right? But this makes it more urgent for you to pay off your balances aggressively. So if you're paying off debt, absolutely keep going. I know it feels like climbing a mountain to do, and if you haven't started paying off your debt yet, looking up at that mountain ahead of you may feel insurmountable, but I promise you, slow and steady wins the race. You guys can Google for inspirational stories. There are tons of stories on the internet and even some on our podcast of people talking about paying off $50,000 in credit card debt, $100,000 in credit card debt. It's just going to take time. It's just going to take time. But if you're consistent with it, you'll get there. Um, and, paying off that debt on time every time is going to keep building that credit, which is why we always talk about debt and credit hand in hand, because the more in debt you are, the lower your credit. But as you pay down that debt and as you're consistent paying down with that debt, the debt's going to come down and the credit score is going to go up, which is, you know, a pretty cool thing to watch in real time. Next slide, an emergency fund. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Most Americans have less than $1,000 saved to cover an emergency. And an emergency fund is great for job loss. We talk about it a lot in the context of if you lost your job, would you be able to pay the bills? But it's more than just job loss, right? Like it's an expensive surgery that your dog needs. It's a car's dead battery or, a family emergency that you need to fly home for. It's all these things. And we've referred to your emergency fund as kind of your financial suit of armor, right? Like it's not a luxury to have. It's that buffer between like your healthy financial life and a chaotic, stressful financial life, right? So again, going back to credit card debt, we do not want to be in a situation where one of those life emergencies forces us to charge that on a credit card, because that's just going to build us deeper and deeper and deeper into debt. So, here again, we all have competing financial priorities. So you don't have to build an emergency fund overnight, but starting one now, even like $20 here or there, throwing in $20, throwing in $40, if you have a $5 bill left over from lunch, right? Like throw that into the emergency fund. And over time, it's really going to build up. All right, the next slide is how much to save in the context of your emergency fund. So you've probably heard that the rule of thumb to save 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. And that number, particularly when I was in my 20s and 30s, it kind of like made my eyes glaze over, right? To think about saving like 3 months of rent, 3 months of internet, 3 months of food. Like that would be a huge, huge chunk of change. Um, and it is still a solid rule of thumb, but it really depends on your life, right? If you are single and you're working in a stable job that gives you health insurance, then maybe your picture looks a little bit different than if you're a freelancer and you're the sole earner supporting two kids and you work in like a volatile industry. You might feel a little bit more comfortable with more, right? Um, and sometimes if you have a partner that is working, right, the chances of you both losing your jobs are relatively slim. So my husband and I, for example, like we always kind of think in the back of our minds, like, well, if he gets fired or if he gets laid off, like I can pay the bills. And he thinks the same thing about my job. So there is a little bit of reassurance when you do have a partner in your life, um, who's working. But you guys know your own situation. But the saving of 3 to 6 months worth of expenses is a good rule of thumb. But here again, don't be intimidated by the amount. Just focus on saving as much as you can. The next slide is where to keep it. And this one is just a brief note here, right? Because emergency funds do not belong, your emergency fund money does not belong in the stock market. I don't think that would be anybody's first go-to to put it in the stock market, but it is very risky. Emergency fund money belongs somewhere safe, accessible, and frankly boring, kind of like a high yield checking account. And the goal is that you keep it separate from your day-to-day checking account so you're not tempted to just dip into it to buy everyday stuff. Right now, I know Linda and I chatted, and I know Town and Country is offering 5% on high yield checking account balances, up to $10,000, I think it was. So, that's a great rate worth looking into. And money market accounts are also a solid option for emergency funds. But the real goal is that emergency funds are separate from your regular checking account so you don't spend them. The next slide, speaking of stock markets, even though your emergency fund money does not belong in the stock market, other funds that you have do. Because saving is smart. Saving is one of the best things you can do. But unfortunately, with inflation and with the cost of everything going up, saving is just not enough, right? Because over time, inflation is going to eat away at your money's value. So I did the math, and $100 in 2010, which was not that long ago, it's actually worth just $67 today. That's because of inflation, because the price of everything has gone up. So that $100 in 2010 buys a heck of a lot less today in 2025. But the way we grow our wealth, particularly wealth that we're going to want in retirement, is to invest. So if we look at the S&P 500, which is one of the main indexes, um, the growth over the last 50 years is about 10% annually, according to JP Morgan, right? So that's the S&P 500, even though there's been ups and downs in the stock markets, there's been recessions, there's been, panic over COVID and whatnot that has taken the market down a peg. Overall, over time, the market has returned 10% annually. So, doing the math on that, if you were to save $100 a month in a regular savings account, earning just like 0.5% interest, which is next to nothing, you would have $12,300 after 10 years. But if you invested that same amount and you averaged 7% stock market returns, which is a little less than the 10% I cited, but just trying to keep it the worst case scenario, you would have over $17,300, right? So we see the power of growth in the stock market. It just, you can't invest in the stock market with money that you're going to need tomorrow. The money that you're investing in the stock market is going to be money that you might need in retirement or money that you might need in 10 years to buy a house. You're just not going to touch it. You're going to let it do its thing and let that interest accrue. Um, so the real takeaway here is that savings is great. Savings are going to keep you safe, particularly with emergency savings, but investing is going to help your money grow. So you need both. You need that twofold strategy of saving and investing, right? Because one is going to keep you safe in the here and now. The other one is going to lead you to long-term wealth growth. Setting up an IRA is the best vehicle to save and invest for retirement. And there's something called a target date fund, which basically it calculates how many years you are away from retirement and it invests for you. So if you invested in a target date fund in an IRA in your 20s, it might put some of your money in a slightly higher risk stock because you're not going to need that money till you're 70, right? So you have 50 years until you need to take that money out for retirement. So that target date fund might be a little bit more risky. But then as you age, by the time you hit like 60, 65, that target date fund is going to adjust and it's going to be a little bit less risky because it knows you're going to need that money out sooner. But an IRA, I have an IRA. We recommend that everybody has an IRA. And within that framework of an IRA, once you've invested your money, you can choose, right? You can choose the stocks that you want to put it in, or you can do something like I mentioned with the target date fund, where it just invests for you in stocks that have historically performed, stocks and bonds that have historically performed well. So that would be kind of my beginner advice would be just to open that IRA and start poking money in there as often as you can. Assuming that your employer doesn't offer a 401k. And the reason the employer accounts are so good is because many employers will offer to match a little bit of your money. So her money, for example, my company, we match 3% of what people put in. So it's free money from the employer just as an incentive for people to save. And then if you like picking stocks, if you like picking individual stocks, I know a lot of people really love E-Trade, Fidelity accounts, and Robinhood accounts, all of which are just apps that you can get on your phone. Um, but that's obviously it's a little bit more risky if you're picking an individual stock because the reason I love the target date funds is because your money gets spread out into a bunch of different stocks. So if one of those stocks fails, you'll still be okay, right? But with an individual stock, if you put all of your money into one stock and that stock fails, then you're kind of sunk, right? The next slide is what you're buying when you invest, which is kind of what I was just talking about. Um, when you're investing in the stock market, you're buying tiny pieces of real businesses, right? So if you invest in a stock, you're kind of buying a slice of that company's future earnings. So that slice could be Apple, Netflix, Target, or it could be a mutual fund filled with dozens or hundreds of companies, or a target date fund, like I mentioned. Um, you're not going to be day trading, right? You guys may have seen like day trading videos on YouTube or TikTok where people are just like buying and selling and buying and selling a single stock. I don't recommend that anybody do that unless you're like a Wall Street expert. So your goal is really going to be to build a portfolio that's going to reflect the growth of the economy. And I really love mutual funds, target date funds, ETFs, that type of thing that gets you into a lot of different companies at once. The next slide is where to start. Again, we covered a lot of this. The best way to start investing is through your employer if they offer a 401k, especially if there's a match, right? So if somebody offered a match on 5% of your salary, right? It's kind of like a 5% raise, getting a 5% raise, which is amazing. If you don't have a 401k, open an IRA. Um, and again, what to invest in with your IRA, index funds, um, target date funds, ETFs, gives you lots of exposure to money in the market. All right. The next slide. What if I lose money? This is always my big fear. And for the record, women are always more risk averse than men. So if you're feeling nervous about the stock market, I feel you. Um, But if you let that fear keep you out of the market, that's far more dangerous, right? So when we go back to inflation and what we talked about inflation, so $100 of 2010 money is only going to be have $67 worth of buying power in 2025. That's more scary than putting your money in the stock market, right? The stock market has always, always, always recovered even after crashes. So if we look at 100 years of history in the stock market, we know we're always going to make our money back. We just have to be patient. So let's see. If you invested $10,000 in the S&P 500 in 2003, and you just left it alone for 20 years, if you didn't touch it for 20 years, you'd have made over $60,000 by 2023. That is a huge return on your money. Um, but if you took your money out and you missed the 10 best days in the market over that course of time, you'd have just $29,000, right? So when we talk about staying the course and we talk about not pulling your money out of the market, that's what we're talking about, right? Because I was a journalist in 2008 when we had the Great Recession, and I saw so many people when the markets tanked, they said, "Oh my God, I had $100,000 in the market. Now I have $50,000 in the market. I've got to get my money out right now before I have nothing left." So they pulled their money out. Okay. So what happened is the market rebounded, right? The market came back. It came back above and beyond where it was. Those people who pulled their money out, they just threw away $50,000. If they had waited, if they had been patient and waited, I don't know the exact number of years it took to rebound, they would have maybe doubled or tripled their money. So when we talk about losing money, you might have heard people talk about losses in the stock market being on paper instead of real life. That's because if a stock goes down today, it may go up tomorrow. It may go up in a year. Um, I invested in a quantum computing company because I'm like a total like Star Trek nerd, and I thought that that would be cool. And this thing has been all over the map, right? It like I doubled my money, and then I lost all my money, and then I tripled my money. And now like I think I'm back to like doubling my money, but it's fascinating to watch. The only trick is just being able to sit tight and be calm, take a deep breath, and you will come out on top. All right, next slide. I basically just said it already. Volatility is normal. The tech stocks are going crazy. Interest rates are high, but that's just kind of the cycle that we're in, right? So I have talked to a few experts, economic experts lately, and they do say that growth is expected to slow this year, but that doesn't mean that you stop investing. It just means that you stay steady and you don't sell. The next slide is talking about your paycheck, right? What your paycheck hides. Because I do think if it's been a while since you went through your paycheck, I would go through it again because your paycheck does like hide things for lack of a better word. I think most people focus on the balance in their credit union account, which is great, but your total compensation from your employer is often like 30 to 40% higher than your salary alone, right? So you got to look at things like your 401k match, your health insurance, your paid time off if you have it. Um, if your company, again, with the 401k match, if your company matches 5% of your salary and you make $60,000 a year, that's $3,000 that they're giving you of free money every single year just by contributing to your 401k. Um, so if it's been a while since you went through your benefits portal from your employer, I would dig through it. Again, if you're a freelancer, this does not apply to you. I would just go hard on like an IRA, investing with an IRA. But even if you're a freelancer, it's all the more important for you to go through your paycheck and just to make sure that your taxes are being taken out appropriately if you're having taxes taken out, or to know how much taxes to set aside. So at the very top of your paycheck, you'll see your gross pay. So that's going to be the full amount that you've earned before anything gets taken out. But what actually is going to land in your credit union account is your net pay, which is after taxes, benefits, and deductions. So taxes are usually going to be the biggest chunk that comes out. That's going to include federal, state, sometimes local taxes, and FICA, FICA, which covers your Social Security and your Medicare. The one thing to check here is your withholding. So if you guys have been getting like a huge tax refund every April, it might mean you're having too much money withheld. So you're basically like And I know like getting that refund check is sometimes thrilling, but what you've basically been doing is giving the government an interest-free loan all year, right? You could have done other things with that money. You could have paid off credit card debt. You could have invested in the stock market for a 10% return. You could have saved money in your emergency fund with, one of the high yield accounts paying 5%. Instead, you just like let Uncle Sam hang on to it for a year. So it's not great to be getting a tax refund check. Um, so the next line item on your paycheck is your pre-tax benefits. Again, things like 401k contributions, high yields, health savings accounts, and these are great because they kind of these reduce your taxable income and help save for retirement. So, for example, um, the uh, the 401k contribution that's going to go you're going to contribute to your 401k pre-tax. So it's reducing what you pay in tax today and helping you save for tomorrow. The other things you'll see deductions for things like insurance. Um, you just have to make sure that everything that's being deducted is still something that you want and need. And, your paycheck isn't just a deposit. We sometimes think of it as like a financial dashboard, right? So pay attention to the details. You may spot some ways to save or pay less in taxes, all before the money ever hits your checking account. So it's really worth looking at your paycheck and exploring your benefits portal with HR if it's been a while. So for the next slide, I felt that I would be remiss with the cost of everything being absolutely so insane in 2025 if we did not talk a little bit about negotiating pay, um, particularly for women. So there was a recent ZipRecruiter report that said 65% of workers who negotiated their salary received higher pay, but only 37% of women said that they even negotiated at all. Women are generally more reluctant to ask for more money. But the average pay bump from negotiating is anywhere from 7 to 10%, right? So if we look at somebody making a $70,000 salary, if they negotiated, that's going to be $7,000 more that they're earning every single year. Um, so, I think if it's been a while since you talked to your employer, or if it's been a while since you raised your rates, if you're a freelancer, now is the time because I don't see the cost of anything going down. And as we've discussed so far in this day together today, the cost of everything is going up. So if we do want to have money to save for an emergency fund and to invest and to save for retirement, we have to have the money coming in. The next slide is work trends in 2025. Um, I know that the job market right now has been rough. There may be some of you on this call who have been trying to get hired. I hear from my friends who are looking for jobs that LinkedIn is kind of like a wasteland right now, right? I would say to use this moment if you're struggling to find something to prep for your next move, right? Whether you're looking for a raise or a promotion or to go into a different industry, like take an online course, do some networking, reach out, do some cold calling with people, and think about where you want to go next, right? Like try to upskill yourself and build that network. Those are two of the best things that you can do right now to ensure that if you are looking for a job in the second half of the year, or if you're looking at a new job in 2026, that you can secure that for yourself. The next slide, going back to all of our things on our financial to-do list is the joy regret ratio, right? So there was a study from Slick Deals found that the average American spends $314 a month on impulse purchases. Um, and if you can analyze the joy regret ratio, this basically means how often you regret those impulse purchases, right? If you find that you are regretting the impulse purchases that you're making, it may be time to rethink how you're spending, right? And redirect that money that you have been spending towards goals that are going to make you feel better, not just momentarily happier. So when we talk about impulse purchases, the most important thing that I think I can say to you is think of the last 5 impulse purchases that you made and ask yourself if they were worth it. um, because I can almost guarantee you that at least half you are not going to feel is worth it. And for me, that really helps me rein in my spending. If I feel that I've spent my hard-earned money on something that I've decided a few days or weeks later is not worth it. All right, subscription sprawl, the next slide. Again, we talked about this, but I really wanted to double down on it as we bring this presentation to a close. Um, we all have so many subscriptions, and when we look at our budget, I would just encourage you guys to pay very, very close attention to subscriptions that are recurring monthly, subscriptions that are recurring quarterly, and subscriptions that are recurring annually. I know I had a couple of annual subscriptions that I had subscribed to like on my phone, so they weren't necessarily like coming into my email letting me know. But every single year I was getting charged for these subscriptions. So as you guys are analyzing your paycheck, analyze your subscriptions as well. The next slide, spending in 2025. Um, you know, the best way to fight inflation is through intention. Um, Align your spending with your goals and really give yourself permission to say no. Not because you're broke, but because you're focused, right? Like your money is a reflection of your values. So spend your money on high value things and don't spend your money on stuff that you just don't need. The next slide is financial resilience. This is one of our favorite topics at Her Money. Resilience doesn't mean never failing. It doesn't mean never making an impulse buy. It doesn't mean never falling for a financial scam. It does mean getting back up with more knowledge and more preparation than ever before. Um, there was a recent Northwestern Mutual survey that showed that 62% of Americans have made a major financial mistake. But the difference between people who can recover from that mistake and people who say kind of is having a plan, right? They have a budget, they have an emergency fund, they have identity theft protection. They have a plan to help get them back on track and get them back where they need to be. So, resilience is built in layers. And I know everybody in this call is probably at a different point in their financial life, but we can talk about the layer of emergency savings is a layer of financial resilience. Paying down your debt, that's a layer of financial resilience. Diversifying your income, having a side hustle, asking for a raise, that's a layer of financial resilience. And just having strong boundaries in general, right? Like, don't loan friends money. If you can't afford that bachelorette trip to Las Vegas, don't go. These are the things that are going to help you guys weather any storm, right? We've talked about all this before. I just kind of wanted to bring it all together with one last checklist. Um, Start tracking your spending. Think about the budgeting that we talked about with a spreadsheet or an app. Um, Emergency fund, open or revisit like a high yield account. Start automating contributions to retirement, even if it feels small. Um, Check your credit report for errors. I know there's annual for creditreport.com, but Town and Country actually has a credit monitoring service called Credit Score by Savvy Money, which is really a great way to keep everything monitored without having to manually check it all the time. Um, Ask for a raise, prioritize getting that higher paying job or a side hustle because the best way to ensure you're comfortably able to reach all your financial goals is to earn enough that you're not stressed every month. Because I know we've talked about a lot of things, right? We've talked about paying down debt, we've talked about an emergency fund, we've talked about retirement. Those are three big, big goals, right? Like I would love to put an additional $30,000 into my retirement this year or into my emergency fund or to pay down debt, right? But that's not reality. The reality is that we all have bills, we all have competing financial priorities, and we have to figure out how those things shake out, right? So if you're doing all of those things, but you're not doing enough, like this is a great time to sort of refocus and say, all right, what is my reality? What could I do more of? And what could I actually do less of? Um, and then lastly, I would say visit the Town and Country site, all the incredible resources that they have. There's a wide range of personal finance tools. There's a budget worksheet that could help kickstart you guys on budgeting, financial information, financial blogs, and so much more. to get you guys started. And then on the last slide is also my email address. So if you guys have any questions, if you've read the book and you have questions, if you would like me to point you to a podcast episode where we've talked about budgeting or we've talked about any of the credit scores, debt, any of the other topics that we covered today, I would be more than happy to send you some of our completely free resources as well. And we would love you to join the Her Money community. And we're always here for you. And I'm really thankful to have had the opportunity to speak with you guys today.